A red sky bleeds over a dying city. Down below, in alleys that smell like burnt copper, a man runs with two children clutching his hand. He should not be here. He had a ship. He had a route. He had a quiet life made of cough syrup and broken promises. Then a hatch slams shut behind him, and he is breathing in the dark, and he does not yet know that somewhere across the galaxy, in a tower made of light, a queen is opening her window at the exact same moment, looking up at a sky she has not trusted in 7 years. She has not slept. She has not wept. She has not laid down the wall around her heart. And on a refugee moon in a small tent under a flickering lantern, a child with hair the color of starlight sits perfectly still. She is waiting. She has been waiting for a long time. And tonight, something is about to change. Part 1. The sky over Thranos 9 was bleeding. Not metaphorically. Actually bleeding. Because the local star had a habit of throwing solar flares the color of arterial red across the horizon every dusk. And tonight, the dusk had teeth. Kyle Drayton ran. Boots slamming wet gravel. Lungs burning. A canister of black market antivirals strapped to his back and 3 slaver drones hissing somewhere behind him in the smoke. He should have left already. He knew that. He had known it the moment the cargo dock supervisor gave him that look. The look that said something is wrong tonight, friend. Take your credits and go. But Kyle had stayed. Because 2 kids had been hiding behind a rusted fuel drum near the loading bay, and the kids had been crying without making any sound at all. Which was the worst kind of crying, the kind he knew. So now he was running. Through alleys that smelled like burnt copper. Through a city that wasn't really a city anymore, just the bones of one. Left, he muttered to himself. Left, then through the market, then the back tunnel, then the ship, then we live. Behind him, a child whimpered. He glanced down. The boy, maybe 7, holding his sister's hand so tight her fingers had gone white. Almost there, Kyle lied. Almost there, kid. A drone screamed overhead. He ducked. A wall exploded. Dust. Fire. The sister screamed. Kyle grabbed both kids and dove sideways into a service hatch that wasn't supposed to open, except he had bribed a janitor last week, and the janitor had been kind. So the hatch opened, and they fell. Into darkness. Into a service tunnel that smelled like rotted vegetables and freedom. Kyle lay on his back, heart slamming. The kids on top of him, both of them shaking. "You okay?" he whispered. The boy nodded. The sister, smaller, maybe 5, said nothing. She just stared at him with the eyes of a much older person. He had seen those eyes before, in a mirror. 5 years ago, the morning his world had ended. Kyle pushed the thought down, way down, to the place where he kept things he could not look at. "Listen to me," he said softly. "Listen. We're going to crawl. Slow. Quiet. You hold my belt. You don't let go. Got it." 2 small nods. So they crawled, and 40 minutes later, they reached the docking pad. And Kyle's ship, which was technically called the Marlowe, but which he had personally christened the Reasonable Idea, because every job he took on her was, in his own words, reasonable in theory and disastrous in execution. The ramp hissed open. He shoved the kids inside, sealed the door, engines hot, punched coordinates, lifted off through the bleeding sky just as the slavers reached the dock. Behind him, the boy whispered, "Where are you taking us?" Kyle looked at the navigation panel. "To people who'll be kind to you," he said. "Then I have one more delivery to make." The boy was quiet. Then, "Why did you come back for us?" Kyle did not answer, because the answer was too long. Because the answer was a wife and a little sister who had died in a colony raid 5 years ago, while Kyle was off-world hauling cargo for a margin of profit so small it didn't deserve the name. Because nobody had come for them. Because he had spent the last 5 years coming for everyone else. But he didn't say that. He just said, "Buckle in, kid. Sleep if you can." And then he flew. The refugee camp on Viridian 7 was not a place. It was a stain. A blue-gray smear on the surface of a moon. Nobody wanted, surrounded by drifting tents, salvaged shelters, and the slow, patient misery of people who had been promised help. 5 jurisdictions ago, and were still waiting. Kyle had been here 4 times this year. This was the 5th. He hauled crates of antibiotics down the ramp himself because the local volunteers were thin and tired, and the medic on rotation was a woman named Dr. Pell, who looked like she hadn't slept since the previous century. "You bring the cough syrup?" she asked, not looking up from a child's chart. 2 crates. "Fever suppressors, 3. "Bless you, smuggler." "Don't bless me," Kale said. "Pay me." She finally looked up, smiled the tired smile of a woman who knew he was joking, knew he wasn't going to charge her, knew he never did. "Stay the night," she said. "Eat something." "Can't. Got a run scheduled out of Thranos." "You always have a run scheduled. And I'm always late." She laughed. Then her face changed, softened, got serious. "Kyle, before you go, come with me. There's someone you should see." He was about to say no. He was always about to say no. But Dr. Pell never asked for favors. So when she did, he listened. She led him through the camp, past the mess tent, past the medical wing, past a row of children's bunks where small bodies slept in piles for warmth, to a tent at the edge, to an old woman sitting on a crate outside. The old woman had skin like polished bronze, and a long silver braid tucked under a stained scarf, and a deep scar that ran from her left temple all the way down to her jaw. The kind of scar a person earned a long time ago in a fight they did not lose, but did not exactly win either. "This is Thessa," Dr. Pell said. "She's the one who asked for you." The old woman looked up. Her eyes were sharp and dark and very awake. "You took your time," she said. Kyle blinked. "Excuse me. I sent word 3 weeks ago." "I don't know who you are." "I know," Thessa said, "which is why I sent word." Dr. Pell touched Kyle's arm. "I'll leave you to it." And she was gone before he could protest. Kyle stared at the old woman. The old woman stared back. "There is a child in that tent," Thessa said quietly. "She is too quiet. She watches too far. She knows things she should not know. I have seen many children in many camps, Smuggler. I have never seen one like her. Where are her parents?" "That," said Thessa, "is the question." She gestured at the tent. "Go, see her. Then tell me you do not feel it." Kyle hesitated. He hated this. He hated being pulled into stories. He had enough stories. He had run out of room for stories about 5 years ago. But the old woman's eyes were patient. and patient eyes always won. So he ducked under the canvas flap, and he stepped inside. The tent was small, just a cot, a water cup, a flickering lantern that ran on solar batteries and despair, and a child sitting cross-legged on the floor. Kyle stopped breathing. She was maybe 11, maybe younger, hard to tell. Her hair was the color of starlight on frost. Long, loose, pale silver platinum, and her skin was so white it was almost translucent, not sickly, not pale from hunger, just white, like sea glass, like pearl, like nothing he had ever seen on a refugee child before. And her eyes were the color of tropical seawater, the kind of green that doesn't exist on most planets, the kind of green that looks at you and decides whether you are worth speaking to. She looked up. Her eyes met his, and the girl said very softly, "You came." Kyle opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I'm sorry," he managed. "Have we met?" "No." "Then I have been waiting for you." Her voice was small, calm, certain. The voice of someone who had decided what she was going to say a long time ago and had only been waiting for the audience to arrive. Kyle lowered himself to a crouch, so they were eye to eye. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lyriel." "Lyriel what?" The child looked at him for a long beat, then said, "Just Lyriel. For now." Kyle's neck prickled. Something was wrong. Or right. He couldn't decide which. "Who are your parents, Lyriel?" "My mother is far away." "Where?" "In the city of light." Kyle blinked. "What city?" "The one made of light," she said. "It hums. The walls sing. My mother lives in the tallest tower. She used to sing me to sleep." A storybook. That was all this was. A child's invented sanctuary. He had heard 100 of these. 1,000. "I see," Kyle said gently. "And how do you plan to get back to her?" The little girl tilted her head, looked at him with that strange calm. "You will take me." Kyle laughed. He couldn't help it. It came out before he could stop it. "Kid," he said, "I don't even know which city you mean. I don't know where it is. I don't know if it's real." "It is real. Maybe to you. To me," she said softly, "and to the queen who is my mother." The word queen hung in the air. Kyle let it hang. Then he stood up. He took 2 slow steps backward toward the tent flap. "Listen," he said carefully. "I'll talk to Dr. Pell. We'll see what we can do." "Okay." She didn't respond. She just looked at him with those tropical eyes. He ducked back outside. Thessa was waiting. "Well," the old woman asked, "that child," Kale said, "needs a psychiatrist, not a smuggler." She thinks her mother is a queen." She has a story about a city made of light." "Will you stop saying, Thessa smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had been right for a long time and was finally about to be proven right out loud. "Tell me, smuggler, what color was her hair? White, platinum, silver, whatever. And her skin, pale, very pale. And her eyes, green, strange green." Thessa nodded slowly, and she spoke as a child speaks, who has never doubted the truth of her own words. "Yes, yes. Then she is not lying, Smuggler. Kael stared at the old woman. You can't be serious. I have been across 9 systems in this life, Thessa said. I have seen people of many kinds. The hair, the skin, the eyes. I have seen this before. Once, long ago, on a transit station in the Outer Rim, a delegation passed through. Tall, beautiful, cold. They called themselves the Etherian. Etherian. The people of light. Kael felt the back of his neck go cold. He had heard the word, maybe twice in his life. Spoken by traitors, too drunk to be careful. The Etherian Imperium. A closed system. A people who did not mix with outsiders. A queendom in the spiral arm, where supposedly the buildings were grown and the air was full of music, and the queen ruled from a tower so tall you could see the stars from her window even at noon. Stories. Just stories. That child, Thessa said, is one of them, and she has been here for over a year, and no one has come for her, and she does not cry, and she does not laugh, and she sits, and she watches, and she has been waiting. For what? The old woman looked at him. For someone with a ship, she said, who has nothing left to lose. Kael's mouth went dry. Why me? I don't know, Smuggler. You don't know. I don't. But she does. Kael ran a hand through his hair. He looked back at the tent. He thought about his ship, thought about the route, thought about how much trouble a man could find by carrying a maybe princess across a galaxy. A lot of trouble. A lot. I have a delivery, he said. Cancel it. I have rent. You sleep on your ship. I have a life. Thessa raised one dark eyebrow. Do you? Kael opened his mouth, closed it, opened it. That was unfair, he muttered. That was honest, Thessa said. He sat by the campfire for an hour alone, trying not to decide anything. The stars above Viridian 7 were too many and too bright. The kind of sky that makes a man feel small. Which was fine, Kael thought, because he was small. And he was not in the business of saving princesses. He was in the business of moving cough syrup. The business of moving cough syrup was a perfectly good business. It had limits. It had a route. It had a paycheck. It did not have queens. It did not have lost daughters. It did not have eyes the color of tropical seawater, watching him from a refugee tent. He stood up. He walked back to the tent. He ducked inside. Lyriel was still sitting, as if she had not moved since he left her, as if she had known he would come back. You decided, she said. I decided to ask questions. Ask. How did you get here? In a pod. A pod from where? From the night with fire. What night? The little girl was quiet for a moment. Then, the night the bad people came, there was an explosion, and screaming, and a woman with silver marks on her shoulders put me in a pod and told me to be still and quiet and brave. She said the good people would find me. She kissed my forehead, then she ran back. Did the good people find you? No, said Lyriel. The pod broke. It went too far. And then for a long time it was very dark. And then I was here. How long? 7 winters. Kael closed his eyes. 7 years. 7 years she had been lost. A child of 4. Drifting. Surviving. Becoming something other than the soft thing she had been. Lyriel, he said. He sat down on the floor across from her. I'm not a hero. I want you to understand that. I move medicine. I dodge customs. I am not someone who takes lost children across a galaxy. I know, she said. Then why me? She looked at him. She tilted her head, and what she said next made the breath stop in his throat. Because, she said softly, you couldn't save the little girl, but you can save me. Kyle felt his chest crack open. What did you say? The little girl, she repeated. The one with brown hair. She used to climb on your shoulders. She liked the song about the moon. The colony was burning and you were not there, and you have been sorry every day. His sister, who had been 6 years old, who had loved a children's lullaby about the moon, who had climbed on his back every time he came home, who had died with the rest of them, while he was 3 systems away, hauling a shipment of grain he did not need. He had never told anyone. He had never told anyone. He stared at the child. How, he whispered, could you possibly know that? Lyriel did not look afraid of him. She did not look proud of her knowledge. She looked sorry. My mother's people. She said, feel things that other people do not. We feel grief like weather. Yours is very loud. I am sorry. I should not have said it that way. I am still learning. Kyle could not speak. His throat had closed. The little girl reached out. A small white hand. She put it on his wrist. Her fingers were cool. I will not ask you again, she whispered. I will only ask once. Take me home, please. And maybe when you take me home, you will be able to put her down. He stared at her. The fire outside the tent crackled. The galaxy waited. And somewhere very far away in a tower of bone-white light, a queen who had not slept properly in 7 years opened her window and looked at the sky. Okay, Cale Drayton said hoarsely. Okay, I'll take you home. He told Dr. Pell he was leaving. She did not ask why. She just packed a satchel of dried fruit and protein bars and a child's blanket. She hugged Lyriel. Without crying, she gripped Kyle's arm hard and said, If anyone asks, I have not seen her in months. Understood. Be careful, Kyle. I'm never careful. Try. Thessa by the firelight lifted one hand in something between a blessing and a goodbye. Smuggler, she said. Yeah, you are not as alone as you think you are. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He just nodded. He took the little girl's hand, and he led her up the ramp of the reasonable idea, sealed the door, and set a course away from the only certainty he had ever known, toward the city of light, toward he was beginning to suspect the rest of his life. Todd, the first week she did not speak much, which was fine. Kyle did not need conversation. He needed coordinates and luck and a quiet child and a quieter conscience. But she watched everything. She watched him at the controls. She watched him eat. She watched him strip and clean his sidearm. She watched him sleep the first night. And when he woke up at 0300 with the old nightmare clawing at his chest, she was sitting cross-legged at the foot of his bunk like a small, pale ghost. And she had said very softly, It is not your fault, Kyle. He had not even known she knew his first name. He had pretended to be asleep. By the second week, she had started asking questions. What is this? That is a wrench. What is a wrench for tightening things? Tighten what? Bolts. Why? So the ship doesn't fall apart. Does it fall apart? Sometimes. A long, judgmental pause. That seems poorly designed. He laughed. He could not help it. It came out of him like a hiccup. The first laugh in months. She watched him laugh. She did not laugh with him. But the corner of her mouth, just the corner, turned upward. It was, he realized later, the first time she had almost smiled. He started cooking. He was not a good cook. But he had been a son once, and his mother had taught him how to make a soup out of almost nothing. So he made it. He boiled water. He added the dried vegetables. He stirred. He showed her how. She watched. She copied. She tried. The first soup she made was awful. The second was less awful. The third was better than his. She handed him a bowl with quiet pride. He tasted it. He looked at her over the spoon. "Lyriel," he said gravely, "this is excellent." "I know," she said. He almost choked on the broth. By the end of the second week, she had started humming. Just a little, under her breath, while she worked, while she sat by the viewport, watching the stars roll past. He recognized the rhythm. He didn't recognize the words. "What is that song?" he asked one evening when she was wrapped in the spare blanket he had given her and curled in the co-pilot's chair with her knees up to her chin. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sang it, quietly, in a language he did not understand, a language that sounded like wind moving across glass, a language that was older than his entire civilization. He listened, and then he realized something. She was singing him to sleep. He blinked. "I'm not tired." "You are very tired," she said. "You just don't know how to put it down." So he closed his eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, Kyle Drayton slept without dreaming. The third week the pirates came. He had been expecting them. Maybe not these specific ones, but somebody. The route he was taking went through 3 lightly patrolled sectors, and lightly patrolled sectors were always full of small ships that had decided patrol was a problem and predation was an answer. He saw them on the long-range scope. 2 ships, small, fast, hunting in formation. "Lyriel," he said quietly, "buckle in, tighter than usual." She buckled in. She did not ask why. She had stopped asking why. The pirates closed. Kyle cut engines, played dead, drifted, hoped. Hope, as usual, was overrated. The pirates came up alongside, magnetized a docking clamp to the hull, and started cutting. Kyle grabbed his sidearm. He looked at the little girl in the co-pilot's chair. "Lyriel," he said, "I need you to get in the storage bay. There's a compartment under the floor panel. Lift the panel. Get inside. Close it. Don't come out until I come and get you. If I don't come, wait until the ship is quiet for 1 full day, then crawl out and use the emergency beacon. Do you understand me?" She did not move. "Lyriel, do you understand?" "Yes," she said. "I understand." But she still did not move. "What are you doing?" "I am thinking." "There is no time to think." "I'm thinking very fast." The cutting torch came through the hatch. She unbuckled herself. She walked calmly to the wall where he had clipped a stun baton next to the fire suppressor. She lifted it down. It was almost as long as she was tall. "Lyriel." "You should hide too," she said. "What?" There are 2 of them in the airlock. They will not expect a child. Hide behind the bulkhead. When I drop the first one, you take the second. Lyriel. I am very fast, Kyle. You are 11. I am very fast for 11. The hatch blew open. 2 boarders. Heavy. Armored. The smell of unwashed bodies and weapon oil. The first one stepped in rifle up, sweeping the bridge. He saw a small, pale child standing alone in the middle of the floor, holding a stun baton longer than her arm. He laughed. He had time exactly to laugh. The little girl moved. Kale from the bulkhead did not even see how she did it. 1 second she was standing still. The next, she was under the rifle inside the boarder's reach, and the stun baton came up in a short, tight arc that caught him under the chin with the kind of efficient brutality you do not learn in 11 years of normal life. The boarder dropped. The second one's gun came up. Kyle fired. The shot caught the second boarder in the shoulder, spun him, and the little girl, already moving, hit him in the knee with the baton. On the way down, and again at the base of the skull, when he landed. Silence. 2 bodies. A small, white-haired child standing over them, breathing hard, the baton trembling slightly in her hands. Kyle lowered his weapon slowly. He looked at her. Lyriel, he said carefully. Where exactly did you learn to do that? She didn't answer at first. She set the baton down. She wiped her palms on her trousers. Then she said very quietly, in the camp, the big children, they taught the small children. We took turns being the watcher. The watcher had to know how to fight. You were the watcher. Yes. For how long? 2 winters. Kyle sat down, just sat down, on the floor, right where he was. The little girl came and sat down next to him. After a while, she said, I am sorry I frightened you. You didn't frighten me. I did a little, maybe a little. A pause. Kyle. Yes, my mother does not know I know how to do this. I imagine not. She will be sad. She will be glad, he said. She will be sad about why, but she will be glad you knew how. The child considered this. She put her head against his shoulder, just briefly. Okay, she said. He sat there for a long time. He held the stun baton on his knees. He thought about a queen in a tower in a city of light, who had no idea that her daughter had spent the last 7 years learning how to break a man's knee. He thought about how he was going to be the one who told her. He thought, I am in so much trouble. They reached the edge of Etherian space on the last day of the 3rd week. He had thought maybe the border would be quiet. A buoy, a drift line, maybe a courteous warning broadcast asking him to identify himself. It was not quiet. It was not quiet. 6 warships dropped out of nowhere. 6. Sleek, white, pale as bone, pale as Lyriel's hair, engines glowing the faintest blue. The kind of ships that did not need to fire because the threat of their presence was its own kind of weapon. His proximity alarms went insane. His comm console lit up with a hail. He answered. A face filled the screen. A man. Tall. Severe. White hair pulled back. Skin pale as porcelain. Eyes the color of cold steel. Wearing armor that looked grown rather than built. Unidentified vessel, the man said, in flat, unaccented Dandart. You are entering sovereign Etherian territory. State your business or be destroyed. Kyle cleared his throat. He said. State your business, the officer repeated, or be destroyed. Kyle opened his mouth. He had 100 lies prepared. He had spent 2 days in transit thinking about exactly what he would say at this moment. He had a smuggler's instinct for the right lie at the right time. He looked at the little girl in the co-pilot's chair. He chose against every instinct the truth. "I'm bringing a child home," he said. The officer's face did not change. "What child?" "A child," Cale said, "who has been lost a very long time." A pause. The officer looked away from the camera, spoke to someone off screen, looked back. "You will dock at Terminal 7. You will not deviate. Any deviation will be considered an act of war. Understood?" "And Smuggler?" "Yes. If you are lying to me, you will not be the one to die first. The child will be the one to die first. Do you understand?" Kyle's blood went cold. "I am not lying. For your sake," said the officer. "I hope not." The screen went dark. He flew through 6 warships in formation. He flew through a sky that was no longer black, but the deep, slow blue of a planet his bones had never known. He flew toward a city that grew on the curve of the horizon as they descended. Spires of pale light. Towers that hummed at a frequency just below hearing. Walls that moved a little the way trees move in a wind. A city you could not have built. A city you could only have grown. Lyriel stood up. She walked to the viewport. She put her small white hands on the glass, and she began to cry. Not loud, not sobs. Just 2 slow tears sliding down her cheeks while she stared at the place she had not seen since she was 4. Kyle did not say anything. Kyle did not know what to say. He just landed the ship. Terminal 7 was a docking pad of polished stone, surrounded by a ring of armed guards in pale armor. The ramp lowered. He walked down first. The little girl walked behind him, clutching his hand so hard his fingers went numb. The guards did not move. Their commander, a tall man with silver braid on his shoulders, stepped forward. "Identify yourselves." "Cale Drayton, independent freighter." The commander did not even look at him. He looked at the child. And the child. Kyle opened his mouth to answer, but Lyriel let go of his hand. She stepped forward. She drew herself up. And she said in a voice that was not the voice of an 11-year-old refugee who had spent 7 years in camps and pods and pirate-haunted nowheres, but the voice of someone who had finally, after a very long time, decided to be exactly who she was. 6 clear musical words in a language Kyle could not understand. The commander went absolutely still. The guards behind him went absolutely still. The wind off the city went still. Then, as one, every single armed Etherian on that landing pad dropped to one knee, helmets bowed, weapons grounded. Silence. Kyle stood there, alone, the only person still standing, holding the empty space where Lyriel's hand used to be. The commander did not look up. He did not raise his eyes. He spoke his voice low and rough with something Cale did not have a name for. "Sir?" "Yes," Kyle said weakly. "You will come with us." "Okay." "This child," the commander said. "Do you know who she is?" "I am starting to suspect." The commander finally lifted his face. His eyes were wet. "This child," he said, "is the Princess Lyriel Ve Solanas, the only daughter of Her Majesty Queen Eleonora. the heir to the Etherean throne. Kyle waited. And she has been dead, the commander said softly. For 7 years. Cale Drayton. Smuggler, hauler of cough syrup widower. Brother of a girl who had loved a song about the moon. Looked down at the little white-haired child standing beside him with 2 tear tracks drying on her face. She looked back up at him. She slipped her hand back into his. I told you, Cale, she said. I told you I was waiting. Behind them, the wind picked up again. The city of light hummed on the horizon. The guards did not move. The commander did not rise. And somewhere very high above them, in a tower, the color of polished bone, a queen who had not allowed herself to weep in 7 years, was being told by a trembling messenger that the impossible had just walked through her front gate. Hand in hand with a stranger. Hand in hand with a man who did not yet understand that he had just walked very quietly into the rest of his life. Part 2. They walked him through the city in a hovering processional. 6 guards in front, 6 behind. 2 on either side. And in the middle, Kyle Drayton Smuggler, holding the hand of an 11-year-old who was not it, turned out an 11-year-old at all. Or who was. Was both. Was the kind of child the universe had decided to put 2 stories inside. The city watched them. Ethereans lined the streets. Tall, pale, silent, white and platinum hair catching the bone-colored sun. They did not cheer. They did not weep. They just watched hands clasped with the held breath of people who had been told just minutes ago that a miracle was walking through their capital. Kyle, who had once been thrown out of a customs office for telling the customs officer his uniform was an insult to fabric, had nothing funny to say. He just walked. Lyriel did not look at the crowds. She looked straight ahead. She looked at the tower. The palace was not a building. It was a question with walls. The architecture went up and up and up in white spirals that braided themselves into knots and then unbraided. There were no straight lines anywhere. There were no right angles. There were arches that bent in directions Kyle could not name. He had been on 17 planets. He had never seen anything like this. The doors opened. They walked through 3 antechambers, then a hall, then a corridor whose ceiling was the actual open sky. Only, it wasn't because when he looked up, he could see his own face in it. Faintly. Wavering. Like something half-remembered. He stopped looking up. He concentrated on the small hand in his. He concentrated very hard on not throwing up. Because here was the thing. Here was the thing. He had spent 3 weeks deciding slowly in the quiet between stars that he was probably going to like the queen. Because Lyriel loved her. Because Lyriel had been waiting for her. Because Lyriel had crossed a galaxy in a broken pod and lived 7 years in camps and pods to get back to her. So the queen had to be worth it. The queen had to be the kind of woman who deserved that kind of love. But also, he was about to walk into the most powerful throne room in 11 systems, holding the hand of a child who had been officially dead for 7 years. He had not bathed properly in 19 days. He smelled like soup. He had a sidearm strapped to his thigh that was still warm from shooting a pirate 2 days ago. This was on reflection, not how he had imagined meeting royalty. He had not, on reflection, ever imagined meeting royalty. He was beginning to panic. He was beginning to panic. He was beginning to Kyle. He looked down. Lyriel had stopped walking. She was looking up at him. Yes, you are breathing wrong. I am breathing wrong. Yes. Lyriel, I am about to meet your mother, who is a queen, whose daughter is supposed to be dead, whose army outranks every government I have ever bribed. I know. I have not slept in 2 days. I know. I am not wearing the right clothes. You are wearing the only clothes you own. That is exactly my point. She looked at him with that calm. That impossible calm. The calm of a child who had spent 7 years not panicking, because panic was for people with options. Kyle, she said, she will love you. Why? Because I love you. He stopped breathing entirely. The little girl waited. She did not unsay it. She did not soften it. She just looked up at him with her tropical sea eyes and held his hand and waited until he could remember how lungs worked. Then she squeezed his fingers, and she started walking again. And so did he. Tertoy, the throne room. He would much later try to describe it to other humans, and he would always fail. The throne room was carved, if carved was even the right word, out of a single piece of something that looked like marble and acted like glass. Light came from nowhere and everywhere. The ceiling was so high, it had its own weather. Nobles in long, pale robes stood along the walls in 3 concentric rings. Their faces turned toward the dais, their voices held still. On the dais, on a chair that did not look like a chair, so much as a frozen wave of light, sat the queen. Kyle had been ready for someone old. He had been ready for someone hard. He had been ready for someone draped in jewelry and ceremony, and the brittle 1,000-year exhaustion of empire. He was not ready for this. The queen was tall. Even sitting, he could tell she was tall. Her hair was the same color as her daughter's, platinum, pale silver, long, loose, falling past her shoulders to her waist in a single uncut sheet. Her skin was the color of pearl. Her bones were the bones of a woman who had been beautiful at 20 and at 30, and at every year since, and would be beautiful at 80, and would be beautiful at 100. Because beauty like that did not come from youth. It came from architecture. Her eyes were green, the same impossible green as her daughter's. But these eyes were tired. These eyes had not slept in 7 years. These eyes were a war zone, with the dust still settling. She rose. She did not run. Queens did not run. She walked 1 slow step down off the dais, then another. Then she stopped. She looked at the child standing in the middle of the floor, holding the hand of a smuggler in stained traveling clothes. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Lyriel let go of his hand. She walked forward. She walked 1 slow step, then another. Then she could not walk anymore. She broke into a run, her bare feet on the white floor, her platinum hair flying behind her, across the impossible distance. The queen dropped to her knees. Her knees hit the floor. The whole court flinched at the sound. A queen, on her knees, and the little white-haired girl ran into her mother's arms. And the queen of the Etherean Imperium, who had not allowed herself to cry in 7 years, in front of 300 of the most powerful nobles in the spiral arm, closed her eyes and pressed her face into her daughter's hair, and cried. She cried like a woman who had been holding her breath for 7 years. She cried like something breaking. She cried like something healing. Kael Drayton stood in the middle of the throne room with no idea what to do with his hands. He put them in his pockets. He took them out. He put them behind his back. He took them out. He decided, finally, on letting them just hang. Like everyone else. Around the room, courtiers wept. 2 of them simply sat down on the floor. One of them turned and pressed his forehead against the wall and stayed there. A guard in the back in heavy armor slid silently down to a crouch with both hands over his face. Kyle did not weep. He did not weep because he did not have permission. Because grief like this was not his grief. Because he had not been the one who lost her. He had only been the one who found her. He just watched. He watched a queen hold her daughter. He watched 7 years come apart. He thought somewhere very deep down in the part of him he kept locked good. Let her have this. She earned this. Let her have this. He blinked. His eyes, it turned out, were a little wet. That was inconvenient. After some long time. He could not say how long. The queen lifted her face. Her cheeks were wet. Her hair was a mess. She did not look like a queen anymore. She looked like a woman who had been given back in one moment every minute of every day of 7 years. She looked over her daughter's shoulder. She looked at him. Her eyes met his. He felt it the way you feel a touch on the back of your neck. He felt it the way you feel someone calling your name in a crowd. She did not speak. She just looked. Kyle, who had once talked his way out of an execution by complimenting the executioner's footwear, opened his mouth and produced exactly no sound at all. The little girl in her mother's arms tilted her head back, looked up at the queen's face. "Mother," she said. "Yes, my heart." "This is Kyle." The queen looked at him again. "Yes," she said softly. "I see." There was protocol. There was always protocol. A noble in long robes. Pale, old, dignified voice, like a careful diplomat, stepped forward and began to murmur about verification and succession law and the need for proper genetic confirmation before any announcement is made to the queen did not look at him. The queen said, without turning her head, "Lord Vasek, Your Majesty, are you suggesting that I cannot recognize my own daughter?" A pause. "Of course not, Your Majesty." "Then please stop talking." "Your Majesty, stop talking." The man stopped talking. Kyle, despite himself, despite the situation, despite everything, filed. The man's face away. White-haired. Late 60s by human standards. Who knew by Etherean. Long fingers. Soft mouth. Eyes that did not quite track the conversation. Eyes that were watching the child instead of the queen. Watching the child the way a man watches a problem. Kyle did not like that. Kyle did not like that at all. He filed it away. They were led to private quarters. The queen walked with her arm around her daughter's shoulders the entire way and did not let go, even when the doors closed behind them. The private rooms were smaller, warmer. There was furniture that looked like it had been made for people to actually sit on. There was a fire, a real fire, in a real hearth, though Kyle could not figure out how the smoke escaped. There was food. There was so much food. A long table laid with dishes he had never seen smelling of things. He could not name served by attendants who did not look at him directly because they had not been told yet how to look at a human in the queen's private chambers. The queen sat. Lyriel sat beside her, pressed against her side. The queen looked at Kyle. She gestured at a chair. He sat. The chair was, of course, the most comfortable thing he had ever touched. The chair was, of course, going to ruin every chair he ever sat in for the rest of his life. He resented the chair immediately. The Queen did not eat at first. She just looked at her daughter. She just kept looking at her as if she were afraid that if she looked away, the 7 years would come back. Then she said softly, "Tell me." Lyriel slowly told her about the explosion, about the woman with silver marks on her shoulders, about the pod, about the dark, about waking up under a strange sun, about the people who found her, who passed her on again, about the camps, about the older children, about the watchers, about the hiding, about the food, about the colder nights, about the kindness sometimes, about the cruelty more often, about the years. She told it the way she had told Kael, calmly, without crying, like reading a list. The Queen listened. The Queen did not interrupt. The Queen did not weep again. Whatever weeping she had in her had been spent already. Now she just listened with her hand on her daughter's hair, and her eyes growing slowly darker. Kael watched her. She did not look like a woman who was about to cry. She looked like a woman who was about to kill someone. At one point, Lyriel said, and then Kael came. The Queen turned her head. Did he? He bought medicine for the children. He was kind to the doctor. He looked at me. And he saw me. Saw you, how my heart, as a person. The Queen closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were on him again. Mr. Drayton. Yes, Your Majesty. Why did you bring her home? He opened his mouth. He had 100 answers prepared. He had spent 3 weeks rehearsing. He said, because she asked. The Queen blinked. That is all. That is all. You did not know who she was. No. You did not expect a reward. No. You crossed 3 sectors and the Etherian border, which is a capital offense in 19 jurisdictions, because a small girl asked you to. Yes. She considered him. She considered him for a long time. Then she said very softly, "What is wrong with you?" It was not a question. It was almost a compliment. Kael smiled the first real smile in 3 weeks. Small. Crooked. The smile of a man who had been called "What is wrong with you" by exactly 5 women in his life, all of whom had loved him. "A lot of things, Your Majesty," he said. "I have a list." She looked at him. Her mouth, the corner of it twitched, just slightly. Kael, in that moment, in that exact moment, realized he was in enormous trouble. Later, when Lyriel had fallen asleep with her head on her mother's lap, the Queen looked up at him across the firelight. Her hand was in her daughter's hair. Her hair in the firelight was almost gold. "Mr. Drayton." "Just Kael, please." "Kael." "Yes." "There is a traitor in this palace." He did not say anything. He had known. The moment Lyriel had pulled him aside in the corridor an hour earlier and whispered into his ear in a child's voice, the voice in the dark that night was not a stranger, Kael. It was a voice I knew. He had known. The Queen was watching him. "You have already guessed," she said. "Yes." "How?" "She told me." "My daughter." "Yes." "When?" "In the corridor, before dinner." The Queen looked down at the sleeping child. She brushed a strand of platinum hair off her daughter's forehead. "She trusts you," the Queen said, "more than she trusts me. Not yet me, not yet. She'll trust you. I know. It will take time. I know that too. A long silence. Then she said without looking up, "Will you stay? Your Majesty, will you stay for a few days? While I, until we know who, until we know how. Will you stay here in this palace with her, with me, while I find out who tried to murder my daughter?" Kyle looked at her. He thought about his ship. He thought about his cargo route. He thought about the small, neat, manageable life he had built out of the wreckage of the bigger one. He thought about a small white hand on his wrist 3 weeks ago in a tent on a moon. He said, yes. The Queen exhaled. He had not realized until that moment that she had been holding her breath. They gave him rooms. They were the nicest rooms he had ever seen, which was not a high bar, because before 3 days ago, the nicest room he had ever seen was a budget hotel on Thranos 9. He stood in the middle of the floor. He looked at the bed. The bed was the size of his entire ship. He looked at the bath. The bath had a garden in it. Inside the bath, a garden with actual plants growing out of the wall around the edges of the water. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He put his head in his hands. He thought, what is happening to my life? He thought I had a route. I had a plan. I had a perfectly good plan involving cough syrup. He thought she said, "Will you stay like that?" He thought she looked at me like that. He thought, stop. 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 She is grieving and frightened and grateful, and you are a smuggler in dirty pants. Stop. He got up. He took the longest bath of his life. He went to bed. He slept like a stone for exactly 4 hours, and then the screaming started. It was just before dawn. There was a noise in the corridor. Then there was a noise that was not a noise. The wrongness in the air that comes before an explosion. Kyle had been a smuggler for 15 years. He knew that wrongness. He knew it in his teeth. He was out of bed and dressed and at the door with his sidearm in his hand before he had fully woken up. The corridor lights were flickering. A figure was running toward him. He raised the gun. "Mr. Drayton," female voice, familiar. He lowered the gun. It was the captain of the guard. Tall woman scar across one cheek, voice like metal on metal. She had introduced herself last night. Captain Therian. That was it. "What is happening?" "Insurgents. Inside the palace. They are moving for the royal suites. Move." "Where is Lyriel?" "Already moved." "Where?" "With Her Majesty. East Wing. Defensive position. We need you there. The princess is asking for you." Of course she was. Of course she was. He ran. There was smoke in the east corridor. There were 2 guards down. There was a 3rd guard up, but bleeding from one shoulder, holding a position behind a pillar with grim economy. Kyle went past him low. He reached the door of the Queen's suite. He hammered on it. "It's Kyle." The door opened a crack. Lyriel, holding a sidearm bigger than her arm. He stared at her. "Lyriel." "Hello, Kyle." "Where did you get a gun?" "I took it from one of the men who tried to come in." "You what?" "He is unconscious. In the corner." "How?" "I waited until he stepped on the rug. The rug has a pattern. I knew where the floor was. He did not." "You waited until he stepped on the rug?" "Yes." "Lyriel." "Yes." "You are 11. Kyle." "Yes." "There is no time." There was no time. He pulled the door open, stepped inside, closed it behind him. The Queen was standing in the center of the room. She was wearing armor. He had not noticed last night that she had armor. He had not noticed that she had ever been a soldier. She was wearing armor and holding a long, slim blade that was glowing a pale blue along its edge, and she did not look like the woman who had wept into her daughter's hair 6 hours ago. She looked like a woman who killed people for a living. She looked, Kyle thought, the way she must have looked 20 years ago, before there had been a daughter to lose. She looked at him. Her eyes were not tired anymore. Her eyes were on fire. "Mr. Drayton, Your Majesty, take my daughter." "Where?" "Behind that wall. The wall moves. There is a passage. You will go down 2 levels and find the lower vault. You will not come out until I send for you. Your Majesty, take my daughter." "Where are you going?" She looked at him. She did not answer. She walked in her armor to the door. She opened it. She walked out into the corridor, and Kyle heard in the next 30 seconds what sounded very much like 3 grown men dying. Kyle Drayton, standing in a queen's bedroom holding the hand of an armed 11-year-old, said the only word available to him. He said, "Right." The vault was small and white and quiet. He pushed Lyriel in first. He pulled the door closed behind them. The wall slid back with the patient smoothness of something that had been built to slide back for emergencies exactly like this one. He sat down on the floor. Lyriel sat next to him. She set the sidearm carefully on the floor beside her, like a polite child setting down a teacup. They sat in silence. After a while, she said, "Mother is angry." I noticed. She used to be very angry. Before me. She was a soldier. She did terrible things in the war. "What war?" "The old one. Before I was born. Before she was queen." He stared at her. "How do you know all of this?" "She told me. Before. When I was small. She said, 'Lyriel, your mother used to be a sword. Now I am a mother. I prefer mother. Do not make me be a sword again.'" He did not know what to say to that. Then he did. "Lyriel." "Yes. We made her be a sword again." "No, Kyle." "Yes. They did. The ones in the corridor. They made her be a sword. We just made her be a mother." He looked at the little girl. He looked at her sitting calmly on the floor next to a stolen sidearm in a hidden vault, while her mother killed traitors in the corridors above. He thought this child is going to rule this empire one day. He thought gods help anyone who crosses her. They sat in the vault for a long time. After a while, Lyriel leaned her head on his shoulder. After a while, she fell asleep. He did not move. He did not move for 2 hours. When the wall opened again, it was the queen. She was breathing hard. Her armor was dented along one side. There was blood on her sleeve. Not her blood. She looked at the 2 of them sitting on the floor, the man and the child asleep. The man holding her head carefully against his shoulder. And something in her face moved. It moved. Kyle saw it move. He did not have a name for what it did. She knelt down in the doorway. She gathered her daughter into her arms. Lyriel did not wake up. She just settled into her mother the way she had settled into him 3 weeks ago in the co-pilot's chair. Small, trusting, familiar. The queen looked at Kyle. "It is over," she said. "For now." "Yes." "How many?" 12. In the corridor. 3 more taken alive. We are questioning them." "Did you?" "I did what was necessary." He nodded. She looked at his shoulder, at the imprint her daughter had left on it, at his shirt, which was, he realized, a little wet, where the child had been resting. She said very quietly, "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me." "I do." "You don't." "I do." He shut up. She looked at him for a long moment over the top of her sleeping daughter's hair. Then she said, "There is something I need to show you." They went down further. Beneath the palace, beneath the city, beneath the stone. There was an archive. There were no people in the archive. The Queen did not bring guards. She did not bring an attendant. She brought him. He understood dimly that this was strange. He understood more than dimly that this was trust. He did not know what to do with that. She set Lyriel down on a low couch in the antechamber gently, and closed the door and led him into the next room. The next room was full of slim, glowing crystal panels hanging in midair, each one a record of something. She moved through them like a woman who knew every one. She stopped at a panel. She touched it. The panel lit up. A face. A woman's face. Etherean. Young. Hair the color of pale gold. A scar across one cheekbone. Silver braid on the shoulder of her uniform. The Queen's voice went flat. "This is Captain Severin." "Okay." "She was my daughter's personal guard 7 years ago." "Okay." "On the night of the bombing, Captain Severin put my daughter into the escape pod and launched her. And then she went back to die with the rest of the security detail. We found her body 3 days later in the wreckage. We identified her by her armor seal. She received a state funeral. Her family received the highest honor of the Empire. She has a statue in the lower courtyard." "Okay." The Queen turned the panel. She showed him another panel. This one was a record, a surveillance file, date-stamped, 6 months ago. The Queen tapped it. It played. Grainy, distant. A camera looking into a small cell. A woman in the cell, older than the photograph. Much older. Her hair gone gray-white. Her face hollowed by hunger. One of her eyes. Kael flinched. One of her eyes was simply gone, the socket scarred over. But the woman in the cell was Captain Severin. Kael stared. "She's alive." "Yes." "She's been alive." "Yes." "For 7 years." "Yes." "Somebody," "Yes." "Somebody kept her alive and hidden." "Yes." "Why?" "That," said the Queen very softly, "is the question I am going to answer. In the next 48 hours, by any means available, to anyone in this palace I have ever trusted." He looked at her. She was very calm. The calm of a woman with a sword in her hand and 20 years of practice using it. "Your Majesty." "Eleonora." He blinked. "What?" "My name is Eleonora. In this room, with this archive, in front of this file, you will call me Eleonora." "Eleonora." "Yes." "Why are you showing me this?" She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. "Because," she said, "I do not know who else to show it to." He did not breathe. "In this palace," she said, "I have advisors I have trusted for 25 years. I do not know which of them buried Captain Severin in a cell. I do not know which of them ordered my daughter killed. I do not know which of them even tonight, while I weep over my returned child, is in another room writing a coded message to the people I'm about to execute. I do not know, and I cannot ask. Because the moment I ask the wrong person, I tip my hand. And the cell, where Severin is being held, wherever it is, empties. And then I never find her. And then I never find them. And then this happens to my daughter again. Or to me. Or to someone else's daughter. She breathed out. She closed her eyes. She opened them. You, she said, walked into this palace yesterday. You cannot by definition have been part of this. You are the only person in this empire I know is not lying to me. He stared at her. His chest hurt. It hurt in a way he did not expect. He said hoarsely, Eleonora! Yes, I am a smuggler. I know. I am very far out of my depth. I know that too. I will help you. I know, she said. I know. They went back to her chambers. Lyriel was still asleep. They laid her down in the inner room. The queen sat down on the edge of her daughter's bed and looked at her child for a long time. Then she stood up. She came out into the outer room. He was standing by the window, looking out at the dawn. Etherean dawn, pale gold light moving across white spires. Music in the air, faint the city humming itself awake. She came and stood beside him. She did not touch him. She did not need to. He felt her there. After a while, she said, Kael. Yes. Tell me something true. All right. A pause. Tell me something true about you. He swallowed. He thought about 100 lies he could tell, 100 deflections, 100 small, charming nothings. He said, I had a wife and a little sister. They died in a colony raid 5 years ago while I was off-world. I have not slept a whole night in 5 years. I built my whole life around running medicine to refugee camps, because if I cannot save the people I loved, I am at least going to save other people. I came to Viridian 7 with cough syrup. I left with your daughter. I do not understand why. I do not understand me. I am 32 years old, and I do not understand the first thing about who I have become in the last 3 weeks. That is what is true about me. She did not move. She did not say anything. She just looked out at the dawn. Then she said very quietly, I built a wall around my heart, Kael Drayton, 7 years ago, brick by brick, so that I would never have to feel like this ever again. And you walked into my throne room yesterday afternoon, and the wall is gone. Eleonora. I do not mean it as an accusation, I know. I mean, I am only telling you, so that you understand. The way I am looking at you, across this room, is not gratitude. Okay. It is something else. Okay. I do not know yet what it is. That's all right. Is it? Yes. She turned, looked at him. The pale gold light on her platinum hair, the green of her eyes washed paler in the dawn. You are a strange man, Kael Drayton. I have been told. By how many women? 5. 5. To date. And what happened to those 5? 3 of them are friends. 1 of them was my mother. 1 of them I married. Her mouth twitched. It was almost a smile. It was almost a smile. She did not let it fully form. She turned back to the window. She did not reach for his hand. She did not have to. He could feel on the back of his hand the heat of her 4 inches away. They stood there. They watched the city wink. That afternoon, an old man knelt at her feet and explained in a voice almost steady that he had reviewed all of the personnel files of the past 2 decades and there was an anomaly he had not noticed before, and he wished to bring it to her attention. And he was now afraid for his life, because the anomaly suggested that one of her advisors had been signing off for 7 years on personal authorization documents for a black site prison facility that did not officially exist. The Queen did not interrupt the old man. She let him finish. She thanked him. She walked quite calmly into the next room. She closed the door. She broke a chair. She broke another chair. She came back out. She smoothed her hair. She said very softly, "Bring me Lord Vasek." Kyle, standing across the room, felt his blood go cold. Lord Vasek, the white-haired advisor at the reunion, the one who had murmured about protocols, the one who had been watching the child instead of the Queen, the one with the long fingers and the soft mouth and the eyes that did not quite track. 25 years. He had been her advisor for 25 years. He had stood beside her on the day of her coronation. He had, Kyle learned later, held her hand at her father's funeral. He had introduced her to the man she would eventually marry. He had been at the bedside when Lyriel was born. He had named her. He had suggested the name. Lyriel, the light of the morning. He had then, 7 years later, arranged her death, and when it had not gone according to plan. When the captain of her guard had shoved her into a pod and launched her into the dark. He had spent every day for 7 years searching for her, not to bring her home, to finish her. He had failed. He had failed because the pod had broken, because the dark was very big, because a smuggler with a dead sister had bought cough syrup, and a sharp-eyed old woman in a refugee camp had paid attention, and a small girl with platinum hair had decided to be patient. He had failed, and now he was kneeling in the throne room. The Queen sat on her throne. She wore a plain black robe. She wore no jewelry. She did not raise her voice. She said, "Why?" The old man did not look up at her. He looked at the floor. His hands were folded in his lap, in the formal style of a man preparing for execution. He said in a voice as soft as Kael had ever heard a voice, "Because I never had a daughter." The Queen did not speak. The old man went on, "I served your father. I served you. I have never had a child of my own. I have never had a name carried forward. I have never had anything of mine that will outlive me. And I watched you. And I watched the child. And I knew that when she was old enough, she would rule, and I would not. And there would be no Vasek line. There would only be a Ve Solanas line. Forever. And I would die. And the Empire would forget my house ever existed." He looked up finally. His eyes were dry. "So I made a decision," he said, "to make myself remembered. By erasing my daughter. Yes. And me. Eventually. Yes. And how many others, Vasek? How many others have you sat next to? At banquets. And smiled at. And quietly written off. I will give you the list. You will. All of it. Captain Sevren is alive." His eyes flickered. "Yes. You kept her alive. Yes. For 7 years. In a cell. You took her eye. Yes. Why?" He swallowed. "In case," he said, "in case I ever needed proof of the bombing, to use against the political faction I intended to blame. She was insurance. I could not bring myself to kill her. I had served alongside her father. I could not. But you could let her rot in a cell for 7 years. Yes. In the dark. Yes. With one eye. Yes. The queen closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were the color of a glacier. Where is she? I will tell you. You will tell me now. Sub-level 4 eastern wall behind the lower archive. The seal is keyed to my hand. You will open it. Yes. Today. Within the hour. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. Then she stood up. She turned to Captain Therion. Hold him, she said. For now. Bring me Sevren. Alive. Whole as she can be. Yes, Your Majesty. Kael. He stepped forward. Yes. With me. He went with her. She did not speak the entire walk down to the archive level. She walked very fast. Her hands were clenched at her sides. Once on the staircase, she stopped and put one hand against the wall and closed her eyes for the space of 3 full breaths. He stood behind her. He did not touch her. He waited. She opened her eyes. She walked on. The cell. Sub-level 4. Eastern wall. Behind the lower archive. The seal opened to a small empty room and a small empty figure curled on a cot. And the figure did not move when the door slid back. The queen made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound that comes out of you when you have run out of language and only the body is still trying. She crossed the floor in 3 steps. She knelt. She gathered the woman on the cot into her arms. Captain Sevren, the second most loyal woman in the history of the Etherian Imperium, with one eye scarred over and her hair gone white, and her hand so thin Kael could see the bones did not wake up at first. Then she opened her one eye. She looked up at the queen. She did not seem to recognize her. Then, slowly, her face changed. She breathed in. She said in a voice like dry leaves, Ailey. Just that. A name. A name from before the crown. From before the bombing. From before the wall. A name only a few people in the universe had ever been allowed to use. Ailey. The queen pressed her forehead to the captain's forehead. She wept finally. Not for show. Not in the throne room. Not for the courtiers. She wept the way a person weeps when the grief has been alone for a long time and has finally been allowed to come out into a room where someone else has carried part of it. Kael stood in the doorway. He could not look at them. He could not look away. Behind him in the corridor, 2 guards were also looking away, wiping their faces, pretending to be looking at something on the wall. He turned. He walked very quietly out of the doorway. He walked very quietly down the corridor. He found an empty antechamber. He sat down on a stone bench. He put his face in his hands. And Kael Drayton Smuggler Holler of cough syrup, husband of no one, brother of no one anymore, finally cried for the first time in 5 years. Part 3. Captain Sevren slept for 3 days. She did not wake. She did not stir. She just breathed. Slow. Shallow. Like a candle that had been blown sideways and was deciding in its own time whether to keep burning. The queen sat by the bed. Not the whole time. Just most of it. Kael brought her tea. She did not drink it. He brought her a blanket. She did not use it. He sat in the chair beside her and read aloud very quietly from a book of Etherian children's stories that he had picked up from Lyriel's library because he could not read the language. Lyriel had laughed at him. Lyriel had taught him the first 6 characters. He had butchered the 7th. He had butchered the 8th. He had butchered the 9th so badly that Lyriel had snorted out loud, which was the most beautiful sound Kael had ever heard. He read aloud now badly in the broken accent of a man who did not belong here, and the queen, who had not been read to in 50 years, leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes and breathed. That was the 3rd day. On the 4th day, Captain Sevren opened her one eye. She looked at the queen. She tried to speak. The queen leaned forward. "Ailey," the captain whispered. "I am here. There were others. I know. More than him. I know." The captain closed her eye. She rested. She opened her eye again. She said in a voice like dry paper finding moisture, "They were afraid, Ailey. Most of them. They were not cruel. They were afraid. He told them. The empire was about to fall. He told them a regent would save them." The queen's jaw moved. "He told them I would betray them." "Yes." "He told them I had betrayed them." "Yes." And they believed him. Some of them. Why? The captain breathed out. Because Ailey. He had been telling them. For 20 years. That night, after Sevren slept again, the queen stood at the window of the medical chamber and looked out at the city. Kael stood beside her. He did not speak. He had learned that silence in this room with this woman was a kind of conversation. After a while, she said, "I could execute them all." He did not answer. "By morning, I have the names now." He gave me the names. Vasek gave me the names. I could have every single one of them dragged before this throne and put to the sword. He still did not answer. It would be just. He still did not answer. She turned her head. "Kyle." "Yes." "Speak." "I am not Etherian Eleonora. I do not know your laws. I do not know your customs. I do not know what a queen owes her people. That is not what I asked. No. What do you think, Kyle Drayton?" He looked at the city, the pale spires, the slow, soft hum of a place that had been told 3 days ago by official announcement that its princess was alive. He said very quietly, "I think if you execute them all in one morning, then 20 years from now, when Lyriel is queen, somebody will tell her that her mother woke up one day and killed 100 people. Because she could." Eleonora did not move. "And Lyriel will know," Kael said, "that you were right to. She will know that they earned it. She will know all of that. And she will still, somewhere in the part of her that remembers being 4 years old, in the part of her that survived 7 years, on hope she will still wonder whether her mother is the kind of person who could one day do the same to her." The queen closed her eyes. He waited. She opened her eyes. She said, "Then what?" He breathed. "Then," he said, "you give them a trial, a real one, open, public. Everything Vasek did in the dark, you do in the light. And you ask each of them one at a time to tell the truth. And the ones who tell it, the ones who can look the empire in the eye and say, 'Yes, I was afraid. Yes, I believed a lie. Yes, I did this thing.' You give them a chance to rebuild, not to escape, to rebuild. Hard work, cold work, years of it. They earn back the right to live. And the ones who lie, the ones who hide, the ones who would do it all again, those you sentence. By law, not by anger." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Are you sure you are a smuggler, Cale Drayton?" "Reasonably sure. You sound like a constitutional advisor." "I have on occasion talked my way out of customs. I have an instinct for negotiation. And Eleonora. Yes. I think Lyriel needs a mother who can do mercy. Even now. Especially now." Eleonora exhaled. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the fire in them had banked. Not gone. Not gone. Just banked. She said, "All right, Cale Drayton." "All right what?" "We will do it your way." He blinked. "Eleonora." "Yes. I did not mean I was not telling you I am not in a position to." "Kyle." "Yes." "Stop." He stopped. She turned to face him. She was very close. She did not touch him. Etherians, he had learned, did not touch lightly. They touched the way other people made decisions. She said, "I have ruled this empire for 17 years. I have not in 17 years had a single advisor tell me a thing I did not already know. They have all said only what I wanted to hear. They have all flattered me. They have all been brilliant. And every one of them, it turns out, has been letting a man bury my daughter in plain sight." She paused. "You," she said, "have been here 4 days, and you have told me 3 things in a row that I did not want to hear, that I needed to hear. I'm sorry. Do not apologize. Okay? Do not ever apologize for telling me the truth. Okay?" She looked at him. Then she did something he was not prepared for. She reached up. She brushed a strand of hair back from his forehead. It was the smallest gesture in the world. She had killed 3 men in a corridor 4 nights ago, with more violence than this single motion contained. But this single motion, this single brush of cool fingers across his hairline, almost broke him. She let her hand fall. She turned back to the window. "Now," she said, "go sleep. Tomorrow we begin." The trial took 6 weeks. Kyle did not attend most of it. He was not Etherian. He had no standing. He had, in the language of the imperial court, no place. So he stayed in the palace and he worked. He worked because he could not stand to do nothing. He worked because Lyriel, who had taken to him with the unembarrassed devotion of a child, who had finally decided who her people were, kept dragging him by the hand into rooms full of officials and saying, "This is Kyle. He saved me, you should listen to him." So they listened. Not at first. At first, the officials looked at him the way you look at a stain on a carpet you cannot quite remove. But Kyle had been a smuggler for 15 years. He knew how to talk to people who did not want to talk to him. He knew how to ask the question that nobody else had asked. And he knew especially where children get lost. He sat down with the director of border security. He said, "Show me your refugee transit data." The director said, "We do not have refugee transit data." Kyle said, "Exactly." By the end of the 2nd week, the palace had a working draft of something it had never had before, a formal refugee pathway mapping initiative. The Etherian Imperium, which had for centuries considered the matter of refugees as something that happened elsewhere, was for the first time going to look at where children went when their planets fell apart. Where children like Lyriel went. Where children like the boy and the girl Kale had carried out of Thranos 9 went. It was, Kale said, When he finally had to present it to the Council of Ministers, not even a question of charity. It was a question of records. It was a question of knowing where your people were. Because if you did not know where your people were, you could not look for them when they were lost. The council listened. The council slowly agreed. The council very slowly voted. Eleonora, sitting on her throne while the vote was tallied, did not look at Kyle, but her hand on the arm of the throne was very, very still. She was, Kyle realized, holding her breath. The vote passed. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. She did not smile. Etherian queens did not smile in formal sessions, but the corner of her mouth, just the corner, moved. He felt it in his chest. The trial ended on the 44th day. 12 of the conspirators were exiled. 23 were sentenced to reparative service for periods between 5 and 20 years. 6 were sentenced to permanent loss of titles. 2 were sentenced to death. Eleonora signed the death warrants without ceremony. The 2 had been the closest to Vasek. The 2 had been the ones who had personally carried out the bombing 7 years before. The 2 had been the ones who had handed Sevren over to him for safekeeping. The 2 were not, Kyle noticed, given a chance to apologize. Eleonora was capable of mercy. Eleonora was not. Kyle was learning sentimental about it. He filed that away. Lord Vasek was sentenced to exile, not death. Eleonora stood on the day of his sentencing and read his sentence aloud herself. He had been her advisor for 25 years. He had named her daughter. He had betrayed her for a name. She said into the silent throne room, "You will be taken to the colony at the edge of the spiral arm. You will live there. You will work. You will eat what you grow. You will have no servants. You will have no titles. You will see no Etherian face, except in dreams if you have them. You will live there for the rest of your life. And every season on the anniversary of the night you tried to murder my child, a courier will bring you news of the Empire. You will hear how we are growing. You will hear how she is growing. You will hear how my daughter is going to rule this empire better than any Vasalanus in 900 years, and you will die there, slowly, of old age, knowing all of it." She paused. "Take him." The guards took him. He did not weep. He did not protest. He looked just once at the small girl sitting beside the queen on the lesser throne. He looked at Lyriel. Lyriel looked back at him. She did not glare. She did not smile. She just looked at him, the way a child looks at someone who has explained themselves badly. It was Kyle saw worse for him than the sentence had been. He bowed his head. They led him out. 8 months passed. This is how 8 months pass. Captain Sevran began to walk on her own again at the start of the 2nd month. By the end of the 3rd month, she could climb stairs. By the end of the 4th, she had begun on her own initiative to spar with Eleonora in the lower training hall an hour every morning with weighted wooden blades. The first time Sevren won a bout. First time in 7 years, first time since before the cell. She sat down on the floor of the training hall and laughed. Just laughed. Hoarse. Cracked. A laugh that had not been used in a long time. Eleonora sat down next to her and laughed too. And the 2 women, the queen and the captain, sat on the floor of a sparring hall and laughed until both of them were crying, and a small platinum-haired child came in, carrying a tray of water and announced with great dignity that she had been worried about them. Kael saw it from the doorway. He did not interrupt. He turned around. He walked away with a hand pressed against his chest, as if something inside him had loosened, as if he had been wearing a tight thing for years, and somebody without asking had begun to undo the laces. Lyriel started lessons: Etherian etiquette, imperial history, stellar cartography, the languages of 7 trade partners. She hated 3 of them. She loved 4. She was, her tutors said, after the first month, with the kind of careful astonishment that tutors reserve for prodigies they cannot quite explain, peculiarly good at negotiation theory. Eleonora had asked gently where the talent came from. Lyriel had thought about it. She had said, "In the camp. You had to talk, or you did not eat." Eleonora had been quiet for a long time after that. Kael was given an office. He had not asked for an office. He had not asked, in fact, for anything. But the office appeared anyway on the 3rd floor of the eastern wing, with a window that looked out over the lower courtyard. There was a desk. There was a chair. There was a door with a plate on it that he could not read because it was in Etherian, but which he was pretty sure said Minister for Humanitarian Affairs. He had not been told he was the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs. He had simply been placed in the office. He had a meeting with the Council of Ministers on his 2nd day. He had a budget by his 2nd week. He had, by the end of his 1st month, a staff of 40. By the end of his 3rd month, he had partnerships with 17 independent aid agencies across 9 systems, including Dr. Pell's old camp on Viridian 7, which received its first official supply convoy under Etherian seal halfway through Kael's 4th month in office. Dr. Pell, when the convoy arrived, was reported to have wept. Reported by Lyriel, who somehow knew everyone, who had a network of informants, who was 11. There was a moment sometime in the 6th month when Kael was sitting alone in his office, staring at a report on refugee child trafficking through the Outer Rim, and he realized that he had not thought about his ship in 17 days. He had not thought about the reasonable idea in 17 days. He had not thought about the route. He had not thought about the Smuggler's bar on Thranos 9, where he used to drink alone. He had not thought about his old life. He sat with that. He sat with it for a long time. He thought, I have changed. He thought I changed, and I did not even notice. And then a poor platinum-haired child slammed his office door open. Without knocking, climbed into the chair across from his desk, put her bare feet up on his stack of reports, and said with great authority, "Mother says you are working too hard. Mother says I am to take you to dinner. Mother says wear something nice. Mother says, please." Kael blinked. "Mother says, please." "Yes. Your mother, the queen of the Etherian Imperium." "Yes." "Said, please." "Yes." "Lyriel." "Yes." "I think your mother is courting me." "Yes, Kael. You have noticed this. Everyone has noticed this." "Lyriel." "Yes." "How long has everyone noticed this?" "Since the 2nd week." "And how long," he said carefully, "have I known?" She considered him. "Tonight," she said gravely. "I think you are about to know tonight." He wore something nice. His staff had mysteriously ordered him a new set of formal robes. pale gray, soft, cut for a human frame. Cut, in fact, exactly for his frame, which suggested someone had measured him in his sleep. He stood in front of the long mirror in his rooms. He looked at himself. He thought, I look ridiculous. He thought I look like a man who used to fly a freighter and now goes to dinner with a queen. He thought that is what I am. He thought, no, the private dining room, a small one. 3 places set. Lyriel arrived first, hair brushed, wearing an actual dress which he had never seen her wear, and which she clearly hated, and which she clearly was wearing only because the occasion required it. He sat down. He waited. Eleonora came in. He stood up. Immediately. Without thinking, she had let her hair down. All of it. Platinum falling to her waist, catching the firelight like water. She wore a long, pale robe with no jewelry. She wore no crown. She wore nothing on her at all that said Queen. She looked simply like the most beautiful woman in any room he had ever stood in. Lyriel behind him made a small, satisfied noise. Eleonora did not sit. She walked across the room. She walked with great calm directly to him. She stopped 2 paces away. She looked at him. She said, "Sit down, Kyle. You are not breathing." He sat down. He had not been breathing. She sat. Lyriel poured the water. Lyriel had insisted apparently on doing the pouring herself. The water shook a little in the pitcher. She set it down. Eleonora looked at her daughter. "Lyriel." "Yes, mother." "You are excused for the next 10 minutes. "What? 10 minutes? But I wanted to see Lyriel." "Mother." "Out." Lyriel sighed dramatically, slid off her chair, marched to the door, and at the door turned around and said, "Tell him properly, or I will tell him." She closed the door behind her. Kyle stared at the door. He stared at the door for a long time. He turned back to Eleonora. "Tell me what?" he said weakly. She did not answer right away. She picked up a small crystal cup of water. She did not drink from it. She set it down. She looked at him. She said, "Kyle." "Yes." On Etheria, when one of us wishes to ask another of us to share a life, we do not say words first. We give a stone. A stone. A small crystal. It is grown in the wall of a tower, in the mountains, in the place where my people learn to grow buildings. The crystal is alive. It hums to itself. When one Etherian gives the stone to another, the other holds the stone in their hand, and if they accept the stone, sings back. The stone changes its hum. To answer, it is the oldest thing my people do. He did not say anything. He could not. Eleonora reached into the sleeve of her robe. She brought out a small object. She set it on the table between them. It was a clear crystal about the size of a thumbnail. It glowed very faintly. It hummed very faintly. The note it hummed was so quiet, he could feel it in his teeth more than hear it. He stared at it. He stared at her. "Eleonora." "Yes." Kyle." "Yes." "I am the queen. I do not kneel." "Okay. Even for this." "Okay. But I have brought you the stone." "Okay." A pause. "That," she said very softly, "is as close as I come." He looked at the stone. He looked at her. He looked at the door behind which an 11-year-old child was almost certainly listening through the wood. He looked back at the stone. He picked it up. It was warm. It had no business being warm. He held it in his closed hand. He felt it hum against his palm. He looked at Eleonora. He thought I had a wife. I loved her. She died. I thought I would never love anyone again. I built my whole life around the certainty that I would never love anyone again. I built a route, a schedule, a small, careful, empty life. I thought I had made my peace, he thought. And then a small girl asked me for a ride. He thought. And then her mother brushed my hair back from my forehead. He thought, and then I was a different man, he thought, and then I am here. He thought, and there is a humming stone in my hand. He said hoarsely, Eleonora. Yes. I do not know your customs. I do not know your language. I do not know how to grow buildings. I do not know what your stone is supposed to do in my hand. I do not even know how to address you in a room with witnesses. I am 32 years old. I am a smuggler. I am an idiot. I am almost certainly going to embarrass you in front of foreign delegations on at least one occasion. I am aware. I lost a wife 5 years ago, and I have not until you looked at another woman without feeling like I was betraying her ghost. She did not blink. She did not flinch. She just listened. And the only thing I know, he said, the only thing I know in this room is that I do not want to leave it. I do not want to leave this palace. I do not want to leave this city. I do not want to leave your daughter. I do not want to leave you. I want to be where you are, for all the years I have left, even if half of them go badly, even if all of them go badly. I want to be where you are. He paused. The stone in his hand changed. It changed its hum. It changed its note. It rose very slightly in pitch. Eleonora Queen, Eleonora ve Solanas of the Etherean Imperium, who had not allowed a man to make her cry in 15 years, put one hand to her mouth. The other hand, the one on the table, reached out. She did not take his hand. She just laid her fingers, the very tips of her fingers, against his wrist. Cool fingers. Steady fingers. The fingers of a woman who killed when she had to and held when she could. She said, "Then stay." He nodded. He could not speak. She said, "Stay, Kyle." He nodded again. She said, "Stay." And from the other side of the closed door, very softly, but unmistakably, the voice of a small girl said, "I knew it." The wedding was set for the first day of spring, Etherean spring, which Kyle learned was not a season the way humans understood seasons. It was a particular alignment of moons. It happened on Solaris Prime, exactly once every 3 local years. The Empire had not had a royal wedding in 40 years. The Empire did not exactly know what to do. So Eleonora told them. She told them they were going to do something simple. They were going to do something small. The ministers were appalled. The ministers had been planning a state event with delegations from 12 allied systems and a banquet for 3,000. The ministers were already engraving things. Eleonora looked at the ministers. She said, "Simple, small, in the garden." The ministers tried to object. She said, "I've already been to a state event. I had one. When I married Lyriel's father 20 years ago, I had 3,000 guests and 12 delegations, and a banquet that lasted 4 days. I do not need that again. I do not want that again. I am marrying a smuggler in a garden. I will wear something pale. I will not wear a crown. The guests will be the people who matter." She paused. "That is the Empire's wedding," she said. "There will be no other." Lyriel, standing beside her mother, said with great satisfaction, "That," she pointed at her mother, "that is my mother now." The ministers gave in. The ministers always gave in. Dr. Pell came. She wore the formal robes the palace had sent her, and she looked uncomfortable in them. And she hugged Cale so hard she nearly cracked one of his ribs, and she said into his ear, "You absolute idiot! Look at you!" And he laughed and held on to her and said, I know. Thesa came, the sharp-eyed old woman in the refugee camp who had pointed at a child and said, "Go see her." Thesa came on a state transport. Thesa was greeted at the spaceport by an honor guard. Thesa was given quarters in the palace. Thesa, who in 70 years of life had slept in nothing better than canvas, was given a bed with silk sheets and a private bath with a garden in it. Thesa stood in the doorway of her quarters and looked at the bath. She looked at Kyle. She said, "Smuggler." "Yes, this is too much. I know. I sleep on a cot. I know. There is a garden in my bath. I know." She glared at him. Then she laughed. Then she walked over and patted his cheek with one bronze-wrinkled hand. Her fingers carried the long scar that ran down from her temple, and her smile lifted that scar into a softer shape than he had ever seen on her. "You did good, Smuggler," she said. "I know. Don't get cocky." "I won't." "You'll be cocky in a week." "Maybe." "Try not to be cocky." "Okay." She patted his cheek again harder, almost a slap, and walked into her ridiculous room and closed the door behind her. Kyle stood in the hallway for a moment. He laughed quietly. Alone. He thought if my mother could see me now. He thought if my wife could see me now. He thought if my sister could see me now. He did not know exactly what they would say, but he thought in the part of him where they still lived that they would not be angry. He thought in the part of him where they still lived that they would be proud. He thought after a while that this was enough. Captain Sevran stood at Eleonora's side on the day of the wedding. She wore her dress uniform. She had a patch over her ruined eye. She had put on weight again. Not all of it. Some. Her face had come back. Her hands no longer trembled. She stood with the straight back of a woman who had remembered finally that she was a soldier. Eleonora had asked her to stand as her witness. Sevren had wept when she was asked. She had said yes. She stood beside the queen now in the garden on the first day of Etherian spring, in the pale gold light of 3 moons in alignment. And she did not weep again. She just stood, steady, a woman beside another woman who had survived. Lyriel stood at Kyle's side. Etherians did not have a tradition of best men. Kyle had told them gently about the human tradition. He had told them gently that he had no other to stand with him. He had told them with some difficulty that he had no family. Lyriel had looked at him then. Lyriel had said, "I am your family, Kyle." He had not been able to argue. So she stood beside him, in a small dress, holding a basket of pale flowers, frowning very seriously, because she did not want to mess up the timing, because she had been practicing. The garden. The garden was small. It was at the back of the palace. It was the garden where Eleonora had played as a child, where Lyriel had played as a smaller child, where Eleonora's mother had been married 80 years before her. It had benches. It had small ponds. It had pale flowers that hummed if you got close to them. The guests sat on the benches. There were about 60. The ministers were there. Dr. Pell was there. Thessa was there. Captain Therian was there. 2 of the children from Dr. Pell's camp, the boy and his sister. The same boy and sister Kael had carried out of Thranos 9 a lifetime ago were there. They had been brought specifically. They sat in the front row. They looked stunned and clean and held each other's hands very tightly. The 2 children from Thranos. Kael had not asked for them to come. Eleonora had asked. Eleonora, it turned out, had been listening for months every time Kael had told a story about his old life. Every time he had mentioned someone he had helped. Every time he had mentioned someone he had not. The boy and his sister had been on a list in a drawer in Eleonora's writing desk. She had brought them. She had said nothing. She had simply, on the morning of the wedding when Kael had seen them in the garden, said, "They wanted to come. I thought you would want them." He had not been able to speak for several minutes. The ceremony itself was very short. There was no priest. Etherians did not use priests for weddings. There was no document signed. Etherians did not sign documents. There was instead a stone. The same stone. The little hummed crystal that Eleonora had given him across a dinner table months earlier. Eleonora carried it now in her hand. She walked in her pale robe with her platinum hair loose down her back, across the small garden, in the gold light, in the soft hum of the flowers, and the slow, soft hum of the city beyond. She stopped in front of him. She held the stone in her open palm between them. She said in front of all 60 witnesses very simply, "I gave you a stone, Kael Drayton. You held it. It sang to you. It sang to me. The Empire bears witness. I am asking today in the sunlight for what I asked in the firelight. I am asking today in the sunlight again." She paused. "Stay," she said. He looked at her. He looked at the stone. He looked at the small girl beside him, who was watching him with her mother's eyes and her father's calm, and her own particular sweet, ferocious patience. He looked at the ruined captain standing beside the queen. He looked at the sharp-eyed old woman with the long, pale scar sitting in the second row. He looked at the 2 children from the camp. He looked back at Eleonora. He took the stone out of her open palm. He held it. It hummed against his skin. He closed his hand. He looked at her. He said, "I stay." And the garden and the little garden, the small private garden of 75 guests and 3 moons in alignment erupted. Because Etherians, it turned out, did not weep at funerals, but they wept at weddings, all of them. And the wind picked up, and the flowers hummed louder, and the children in the front row clapped without knowing why. And Lyriel, who had practiced, threw her basket of flowers about 3 months too early, and stepped on Kael's foot, and hugged him around the waist, and said into his stomach very loudly, "I am sorry I dropped the flowers, but I am very happy." Eleonora was laughing. Kael had never seen her laugh. She was laughing. She put her arms around both of them, the smuggler and the child, the man who had brought her daughter home, and the daughter herself. And she held them in the pale gold light, while the 60 guests stood and clapped, and the moons moved another inch in the sky. And Kael Drayton, who had once not understood why he was still alive, understood. Years passed, 6 of them, The Lyrial program, that was the official name. She had not been asked. She had pretended to be embarrassed. She had been secretly very pleased. Began with a single supply convoy to Viridian 7 in its first year, and became by its sixth the largest cross-system humanitarian network in the spiral arm. Children who had been lost in border conflicts began for the first time in modern memory to be found. Pathway maps were drawn. Refugee transit nodes were recorded. The Etherean Imperium, which for 4 centuries had not cared, began to care. Other empires noticed. Other empires sent ambassadors. Other empires asked with some confusion how the Etherians had decided to do this. Eleonora answered them when she had to. She said, "My husband decided." The ambassadors blinked. The ambassador said, "Your husband." She said, "Yes, the smuggler." The ambassadors did not know what to do with that. She did not particularly care. Séveraine became Lyriel's personal guard again. Not at first. Not until Séveraine herself asked for it. She asked in the 3rd year. She said, "I am ready, Ailey. I want her back." Eleonora said, "Of course." So Séveraine walked beside Lyriel in the palace corridors and stood behind her in formal sessions and taught her the sword as Lyriel grew taller and stronger and more like her mother and more like herself. Séveraine, watching Lyriel at her first sword bout, looked at Kael across the training hall. She mouthed, "Thank you." He mouthed back, "I didn't." She mouthed, "Yes, you did." Thessa lived another 9 years. She came to the palace twice a year. She was by imperial decree granted a permanent guest suite. The ridiculous one, she called it, with the garden in the bath, which she eventually came to enjoy very much, though she would never admit it. When she died peacefully in her own canvas tent on Viridian 7, surrounded by the children of the camp who had become her grandchildren. Eleonora declared a day of imperial mourning. It was the first time in the Empire's history that a day of imperial mourning had been declared for a person who was not Etherian. The ministers objected. Eleonora said, "She found my daughter." The ministers stopped objecting. And Lyriel grew. She turned 17 on a clear evening in the cool part of the year. She was tall, taller than her mother by half a head. She wore her platinum hair tied back the way her mother had worn it as a soldier. She had her father's calm, and her mother's fire, and her own particular grace, which had been forged in 7 years of refugee camps and the years of palace that had followed, and which belonged to no one but herself. On her 17th birthday, she sat with her family on the wide balcony of the eastern wing of the palace and watched the sun set behind the spires. Her mother sat on her left. Her father and she called him that now easily, without ceremony, sat on her right. Séveraine stood behind them. Lyriel, looking out at the city, said something she had been thinking for a long time. She said, "Mother, Father, when I am queen." Eleonora said, "Yes, when I am queen, I want to rule the way you ruled." Eleonora. "Both of you." Eleonora was quiet. Kael was quiet. The sun moved another fraction of an inch. Lyriel said, "I want to rule the way my mother ruled, with a sword, when the sword was necessary, and mercy, when mercy was possible. And I want to rule the way my father ruled, without a sword, without a crown, without even really knowing that he was ruling. I want to rule like a person who decided to be kind without asking why. Eleonora wept very softly. She did that now sometimes, without warning, without ceremony. Kael on Lyriel's other side did not weep. He just looked at the daughter who had once asked him for a ride. He just looked at her. And after a long moment, he said in a voice as soft as the wind off the spires, "That is the best thing anyone has ever said about me, Lyriel." She looked at him. She smiled. She said, "I know." The sun finished its slow descent behind the spires. The first of the night's moons rose pale above the city. Below them, somewhere in the lower districts, a freighter lifted slowly off the docking pad, carrying a load of medical supplies bound for a camp 3 sectors away. The hum of its engines blended with the slow, soft hum of the city itself. The hum of a place that had been told 6 years ago that its princess was alive, and its empire was about to learn how to look at the smallest among them. Kael leaned his head just slightly against the head of the woman beside him. Eleonora let him. Lyriel reached over and took her father's hand on one side and her mother's hand on the other, and held them both. The wind off the spires picked up. The flowers in the garden far below hummed a little louder, and the man who had once not understood why he was still alive sat on a balcony in a city of light, holding the hand of the queen who had given him a stone. Listening to the daughter who had once asked him for a ride, tell them what kind of queen she meant to be. A queen who had decided, like her father, to be kind without asking why. Kindness, he understood at last, was the only crown worth wearing, and the only one that lasted.